Welcome back. This is lesson 2.2. In this lesson, I will cover the years in which comic book superheroes moved to the center of American culture and were seen as symbols of patriotism and the American way. By the end of this lesson, you will have a good understanding of how World War II gave superhero comic books legitimacy as important parts of American culture, how DC achieved this legitimacy through supporting the American way, and how Timely, or Marvel as we know it today, achieved this through their heroes' intervention in the war. Comic books in World War II. The United States of America entered World War II after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, although formally they entered it the next day when they declared war. Between 1941 and 1944, sales of comic books doubled from 10 million to 20 million copies a month, despite paper shortages. US service personnel read a lot of comic books. For instance, in 1944, 41% of men between the ages of 18 and 30 read comic books regularly, which researchers defined as more than 6 comic books a month. In military training camps, 44% of men read comic books regularly and 13% read them occasionally. Female readership of comic books, which from ages 6 to 17 was only 4 to 6% less than male readership, dropped to 28% for women between 18 and 30. At age 31 and over, the difference between male and female readership returned to just 4% in that age group. 16% of men and 12% of women read comic books. The disparate rates of male and female readership between ages 18 and 30 suggests that military service, predominantly but not exclusively a male activity, led to increased comic book readership. This is our first key point. World War II directly increased the sales of comic books. For many service personnel, their experience of the war included comic books. Soldiers read comic books from Asia to Europe. Even during the Battle of the Bulge in 1944, one of the bitterest battles of the war in Europe. At the Army PX store, a sort of 7-Eleven for service personnel, comic books outsold the combined circulation of Reader's Digest, Life, and the Saturday Evening Post by a ratio of 10 to 1 in 1944. And when the Army polled soldiers for their favorite magazine, of the 189 mentioned, over 25% were comic books. So what did these soldiers read? There is strong evidence that Superman was service personnel's favorite comic book. In 1943, the Army Library Service distributed about 100,000 copies of each issue of the Superman comic book to soldiers. But although the Superman comic books had covers urging readers to buy war bonds and sometimes featuring Superman in some sort of war action, inside the comic book, Superman avoided the war. This might seem like a contradiction. Why would soldiers want to read a comic book about a superhero who wasn't fighting the war? One reason why this might have been the case is because of what the soldiers thought they were fighting for. The war correspondent John Hershey reported that Marines on Guadalcanal fought the war for a piece of blueberry pie, Scotch whiskey, dames, books, music, and movies. Also, an American soldier wrote home that he fought to maintain the right to drink Coca-Cola. Superman, as Clark Kent, failed his eyesight test by accidentally reading a chart in the next room. Superman came to realize this was a good thing, since America's soldiers didn't need his help, because American democracy was served by its fighting men. Batman too did not serve in the armed forces, although no reason was given in the comic books for this. Batman stories implied that he, as did Superman, believed the American people, empowered by democracy, needed no help on the battlefront to defeat fascism. But characters dealt with fascist spies and saboteurs, and both Batman and Superman comic books ran stories about military training and on the need for greater public cooperation with the government's war effort. These stories stressed that America's secret weapon lay in the courage of common soldiers, and that, as the writers of the story in Batman number 15, March 1943 put it, the war amounted to your battle, your future, your America. I should mention Wonder Woman here. Her story is a little more complex, since so many of her adventures involved combating spies on the home front. Indeed, Wonder Woman's origins in All-Star Comics 8, December 1941, involved a story with German spies, and Aphrodite and Athena, the Greek gods who guide Wonder Woman's home, Paradise Island, say, and this is a quote, "American liberty and freedom must be preserved," and Wonder Woman is dispatched to help America, the last citadel of democracy and equal rights for women. But mostly Wonder Woman fought spies and left the combat zone of war to soldiers as well. DC then aligned Superman, Batman and Wonder Woman with America's war effort, but they did so by saying Americans were up to the job and did not need their superheroes to help them. Since DC will not let me show you these comic books, I will point you to a cartoon animation of Superman's adventures during the war. Let me warn you, this cartoon carries racist depictions of the Japanese. These cartoons are out of copyright because someone forgot to renew the copyright. But we'll come back to these cartoons in lesson 3.2 of this module. Marvel's War. Marvel Comics, which at the time was called Timely Comics, took a somewhat different approach to showing their heroes in action during World War II. Timely's three main heroes were the Submariner, the Human Torch, and Captain America. Captain America by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby first appeared in March 1941 in his own comic book. You might remember Jack Kirby from the promo video for this course when I was down on Essex Street in New York, pointing to where he lived his early life. As you can see, the cover of this comic had Captain America punching Hitler. In 1941, America was not yet in the war. The stories inside this comic mostly had Captain America fighting German spies. But unlike DC, Timely Comics named their heroes' foes as Germans and Nazis rather than just alluding to it. When America entered the war, Captain America often fought German and Japanese foes. For instance, in a Stan Lee scripted October 1942 story in Captain America 19 called On to Berlin, he fights various Nazi foes. The Submariner by Bill Everett first appeared in Marvel Comics 1, October 1939. In the Submariner 5, spring 1932, he wages war against the Japanese in the Pacific. The Human Torch by Carl Burgos first appeared in Marvel Comics 1, October 1939. He too regularly fought Germans and Japanese. This cover from the Human Torch 12, summer 1943, gives you a sense of the sort of stories. They're rather violent. Timely showed its heroes as patriotic by having them directly combat America's enemies. These stories often use racial depictions and a lot of violence, and they were popular during the war. This is the end of this lecture. This lesson has 3 key points. Go back over your notes in the video of the lesson to make sure you have noted these points. Next up, lesson 2.3, Comic Book Superheroes, Their Fall from Grace.